The summer heat beat down mercilessly on Pine Grove Street as the afternoon sun reached its peak. At the corner house with the white picket fence and blooming marigolds, a young teen carefully arranged her homemade lemonade stand. She had spent all morning perfecting her grandmother's recipe, adding just the right amount of fresh mint leaves and honey to make it special. The wooden stand itself wasn't much to look at, just some old boards her dad had helped her paint bright yellow last weekend, with a cheerful banner that read, "Ice Cold Lemonade, $2." But to her, it represented something bigger. Every dollar earned brought her closer to the laptop she desperately needed for her advanced placement classes next semester. As she wiped beads of sweat from her forehead, she couldn't help but smile, remembering how she'd stayed up late last night, carefully writing out her business plan in her notebook. The first page showed her calculations. She'd already saved $486 from previous sales and babysitting jobs. The laptop she wanted cost $899. Just $413 more to go, she whispered to herself, arranging the plastic cups in neat rows. The neighborhood kids had already started gathering around, drawn by the cheerful setup and the promise of a cold drink. Mrs. Chen from next door had been her first customer of the day, praising how the lemonade reminded her of summer afternoons in her own childhood. Even Mr. Peterson, the grumpy old man who rarely left his porch, had shuffled over to buy a cup, muttering that it was not bad at all. High praise coming from him. She checked her permit for the third time that morning, making sure it was clearly displayed. Her mom had insisted on getting everything properly licensed, teaching her about doing things the right way. The permit had cost $25 from her savings, but she understood it was important to follow the rules. A group of younger kids from the elementary school stopped by, counting out coins from their pocket money. She gave them each an extra splash of lemonade with a friendly wink, remembering how she used to count pennies for treats at their age. Their delighted grins made her day even brighter. As she served the growing line of customers, she couldn't help overhearing snippets of conversation about her stellar grades and volunteer work at the local library. The neighbors knew her as the quiet, hard-working girl who helped elderly Mrs. Wilson with her groceries and tutored younger kids in math after school. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her stand when she noticed a police car slowly cruising down the street. She didn't think much of it at first. Officers often patrolled the neighborhood, usually waving friendly hellos to residents. But something felt different this time. The car moved slower than usual, and she could feel the officer's eyes fixed on her stand. Checking her phone, she saw a text from her brother. "Hey kiddo, big surprise coming soon. Keep grinding." A smile spread across her face. Her brother had been away for months doing work he never really talked about, but he always found ways to encourage her, even from far away. Little did she know that this ordinary summer afternoon was about to change everything. The table before her was half empty now, with only a few cups of lemonade left. She'd already made $78 today. A good haul. As she reached for the pitcher to refill the display cups, the police car pulled up to the curb. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she watched the officer step out, his face set in a hard expression that seemed out of place on such a peaceful afternoon. Something in his eyes told her this wasn't going to be a friendly visit for a refreshing cup of lemonade. The police officer slammed his car door shut with unnecessary force, making several nearby kids jump. The cheerful atmosphere around the lemonade stand instantly evaporated, replaced by an uneasy tension that seemed to thicken the hot summer air. "What's going on here?" the officer demanded, his hand resting on his belt as he approached. His nameplate read Officer Miller, but his stern face showed no trace of friendliness. The young teen stood straight, trying to keep her voice steady as she explained about her lemonade stand. "I have all the proper permits, sir," she said, reaching for the documentation her mom had helped her obtain. Her hands trembled slightly as she held out the papers, but the officer barely glanced at them. "We've received complaints about unauthorized business activity in this area," he announced loudly, looking around as if daring anyone to challenge him. Mrs. Chen, who had been watering her flowers nearby, set down her watering can and moved closer, her phone discreetly recording the interaction. "But I've been selling lemonade here all summer," the teen explained, her voice growing smaller under the officer's harsh glare. "Everyone in the neighborhood knows me. I'm saving up for a laptop for school." Other neighbors began emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Mr. Peterson stood up from his porch chair, gripping his cane tightly. The group of kids who'd bought lemonade earlier huddled together on the sidewalk, wide-eyed and confused. "This setup is blocking the sidewalk," Officer Miller declared, though there was clearly plenty of room for people to pass. "And I have concerns about food safety violations." He picked up a cup of lemonade and poured it out onto the grass, ignoring the teen's gasp of dismay. "Officer, please," called out Mrs. Wilson, who had been watching from her driveway. "She's doing nothing wrong. We all know her. She's a good kid." But Miller waved her off without even turning around. "Pack this up now," he ordered, his voice growing louder. "Or I'll have to take official action." The teen's eyes welled with tears as she looked at her carefully made stand, the bright yellow paint suddenly seeming mockingly cheerful. "I have the permit right here." She tried one more time, her voice cracking. "My mom helped me get everything in order. You can call City Hall to verify." But Officer Miller cut her off by roughly pushing the stand, causing the pitcher to topple. Lemonade spilled across the sidewalk as several neighbors called out in protest. The teen stumbled backward, caught off guard by the sudden aggression. "That's enough." Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her phone still recording. "This is completely unnecessary. We're calling your supervisor." Other neighbors had their phones out too, capturing the scene as it unfolded. The teen's phone buzzed in her pocket, another text from her brother, but she couldn't check it now. Her hands shook as she tried to save what she could of her supplies, while Officer Miller continued his intimidating stance. "I'm shutting this down," he announced, reaching for his handcuffs. "Put your hands where I can see them." The neighborhood erupted in protests, but Miller seemed to grow more aggressive with each objection. Little did he know that somewhere across the city, her brother's phone was lighting up with urgent messages from neighbors, along with video clips of the unfolding scene. The quiet afternoon had turned into something none of them could have expected, and it was far from over. The next few moments would change everything, not just for the teen and Officer Miller, but for the entire community. As the situation escalated, none of them realized that this wasn't just about a lemonade stand anymore. It was about to become something much bigger, something that would make headlines and force their quiet suburban neighborhood into an unexpected spotlight. The world seemed to move in slow motion as Officer Miller reached for the teen's wrist. The crowd of neighbors gasped collectively, their phones recording every moment of this unbelievable scene. The young girl's eyes widened in fear and confusion. Just hours ago, she had been worrying about having enough ice for her lemonade. "You're under arrest for resisting an officer and operating an illegal business," Miller declared, his voice carrying across the formerly peaceful street. The handcuffs clicked shut around her small wrists, cold metal against skin that had been warmed by the summer sun. "She's just a child." Mrs. Chen's voice cracked with emotion as she stepped forward. "This is absolutely ridiculous." Other neighbors joined in, their voices rising in protest. Mr. Peterson had already dialed 911, demanding to speak to a police supervisor, his usually quiet voice now strong with purpose. The teen's carefully made sign fell to the ground, yellow paint splintering on impact as Miller roughly dismantled the stand. The pitcher of grandmother's special recipe lemonade shattered on the sidewalk, sending glass shards skittering across the concrete. Each crash felt like a physical blow to the young entrepreneur who had spent countless hours building her small business. Phones recorded from every angle as Miller pushed the teen toward his patrol car, ignoring her quiet sobs and the neighbors' increasingly vocal protests. Mrs. Wilson had rushed to call the girl's parents, her trembling fingers struggling with the phone numbers. The elementary school kids who had been regular customers watched in shocked silence, their half-finished cups of lemonade forgotten in their hands. "I want my mom," the teen whispered, but her quiet plea was drowned out by the chaos around her. The summer breeze carried the sweet scent of spilled lemonade, mixed with the sharp tang of fear and anger that now permeated the street. Within minutes, the video clips started circulating on social media. The hashtag #LemonadesStandJustice began trending locally, then nationally. Each share, each retweet spread the story further. A young honor student arrested at her own lemonade stand, her permit ignored, her dreams literally shattered on the sidewalk. A second police car arrived on the scene, lights flashing but no siren. The new officer, clearly more experienced, took in the situation with visible concern. He immediately began talking into his radio, his expression growing more troubled as he watched the recordings on neighbors' phones. The teen's parents arrived just as she was being placed in the back of Miller's patrol car. Her mother's anguished cry cut through the neighborhood like a knife. Her father, usually calm and composed, looked like he might crumble at the sight of his daughter in handcuffs. But it was the message lighting up the teen's phone, still lying face down on the overturned table, that would prove to be the most significant moment of this horrible afternoon. Her brother's last text remained unread. "Got your back, always. On my way home." The community rallied immediately. Mrs. Chen had already started a group chat for the witnesses. Mr. Peterson, despite his bad hip, was collecting contact information from everyone who had recorded the incident. The elementary school kids' parents were calling the local news stations. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug. As Miller's patrol car pulled away from the curb, the teenager caught one last glimpse of her neighborhood through tear-blurred eyes. The bright yellow pieces of her broken stand lay scattered across the sidewalk like fallen leaves, but around them stood a community united in outrage and determination. What Officer Miller didn't know, couldn't have known, was that this moment would become much more than just another display of power. The teen's brother, a man whose skills and connections went far deeper than anyone in the quiet suburb could have guessed, was already in motion. The real story was just beginning, and justice would come in ways none of them could have anticipated. Half a world away, a man sat in a dimly lit hotel room, his laptop screen illuminating his tired face. He hadn't slept since receiving the first message about his sister's arrest. The video had gone viral, reaching him despite being on a classified assignment. His jaw clenched as he watched his little sister being handcuffed over a lemonade stand. "I'm done," he spoke quietly into his satellite phone. "Family emergency. I'm calling in all my accumulated leave." His supervisor started to protest, but something in his voice made them pause. After 5 years of perfect service and numerous successful operations, they knew better than to argue. Within hours, he was on a military transport heading stateside. His fingers moved swiftly over his phone, making calls to old contacts, lawyers, investigators, and people who owed him favors. Each call added another piece to the puzzle he was already assembling in his mind. Back home, his sister had been released from custody after 3 terrifying hours at the police station. Their parents had arrived with a family lawyer, outraged but relieved to bring their daughter home. The house was full of concerned neighbors bringing food and support, turning their living room into an impromptu command center for what was quickly becoming a community movement. Mrs. Chen had organized a social media campaign that was gaining national attention. Mr. Peterson, despite his usual reclusiveness, had contacted his grandson who worked at a major news network. The story was spreading like wildfire. Honor student arrested at lemonade stand. Community demands justice. As the brother's plane touched down, his phone buzzed with an update. The police department had issued a standard statement about following procedures and investigating the incident. He smiled grimly. They had no idea what was coming. His years of intelligence work had taught him that the most effective weapons weren't guns or force, but information and strategy. Walking through the airport, he noticed his face reflected in the windows. harder than when he'd left home. But his eyes still held the same protective determination they'd had since he was a kid, looking out for his little sister. He'd missed her graduation from middle school, her first science fair win, and countless other moments. But he wouldn't miss this fight. The Uber driver who picked him up noticed his military bearing, but said nothing, just nodded respectfully and turned up the radio where they were discussing the lemonade stand incident. The brother listened intently, noting names, quotes, and reactions. Each piece of information was another tool in his arsenal. Pulling up to his childhood home, he saw the yellow police tape still wrapped around the remains of the lemonade stand. Someone had placed flowers there, turning it into a small memorial to innocence lost. His sister's bright banner lay crumpled nearby, the cheerful lettering now a bitter reminder of how quickly things could change. Inside, he found his sister curled up on the couch, trying to be brave but still shaken. When she saw him, her eyes lit up for the first time since the incident. "You really came," she whispered as he hugged her. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." He cut her off gently. "That's what big brothers do." Over her shoulder, he caught his parents' grateful looks. They knew their son, knew his skills went far beyond what they could imagine. If anyone could turn this situation around, it was him. Setting up his laptop at the kitchen table, he began his work. His sister watched curiously as his fingers flew over the keyboard, not knowing that her brother was accessing databases and records that would reveal Officer Miller's history of complaints and suspicious patterns of behavior. "Don't worry about the laptop for school," he told her, his eyes never leaving the screen. "We're going to get you something much better than what you were saving for." What he didn't say was that by the time he was done, she would get far more than just a laptop. She would get justice, served cold, and by the book. The next morning would mark the beginning of something the police department never saw coming. Not an attack, not a scandal, but a methodical, legally sound dismantling of years of unchecked power and prejudice. And it all started because someone chose the wrong lemonade stand to harass. The morning sunlight streamed through the living room windows as the brother sat surrounded by stacks of papers and multiple computer screens. Dark circles under his eyes revealed he hadn't slept, but his focus remained sharp. 3 days had passed since his return, and each hour had revealed something more troubling of Officer Miller's history. "Look at this," he murmured, showing his sister a spreadsheet. She'd insisted on helping, wanting to understand rather than just be a victim. The data showed a clear pattern. Every business Miller had reported for violations in the past year was owned by or employed young people of color. Not a single complaint had been filed against any other establishments. Their kitchen had become an unofficial headquarters. Mrs. Chen brought over her famous dumplings, sitting down to share what she'd learned from other shop owners in the area. The Vietnamese restaurant on Oak Street, she said between bites, they had similar problems last month. The owner was too scared to file a complaint. The brother's phone buzzed constantly with messages from his old military contacts. One had connected him with a retired internal affairs investigator who provided access to previously buried complaint records. Another shared footage from police body cameras that had mysteriously failed to upload to the department's servers. "This goes deeper than just one officer," the brother explained to his parents over dinner. "Miller's part a larger problem." He showed them documents revealing how similar incidents had been systematically downplayed or ignored by department leadership. His sister listened intently, her initial fear now transformed into determination to help expose the truth. Mr. Peterson shuffled in around noon, leaning on his cane, but eyes bright with purpose. His grandson at the news station had discovered that several small business owners had been pressured into paying protection money, disguised as community safety donations. The brother added this information to his growing wall of evidence, connecting threads that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The local coffee shop became their second office. The owner, whose daughter had once faced similar harassment, kept their cups filled as they interviewed other victims. Many were initially hesitant to speak, but seeing the young girl from the lemonade stand gave them courage. One by one, They shared their stories, each account adding another piece to the puzzle. They target kids and small business owners because they think we're powerless, the sister realized, her voice stronger now. But they didn't count on us working together. She'd started documenting each testimony, her laptop finally replaced by a new one her brother had bought her, though now she was too busy seeking justice to worry about material things. The breakthrough came when they discovered a pattern in Miller's patrol schedule. Every Thursday, he would spend exactly 45 minutes parked behind certain businesses, his body camera conveniently turned off. The brother cross-referenced these times with bank deposits made to an account under a fake name. The web of corruption began to unravel. Local business owners started coming forward with security camera footage showing similar incidents. The brother organized everything meticulously, building an airtight case that couldn't be ignored or swept under the rug. His military training had taught him the importance of thorough documentation and irrefutable evidence. A young lawyer from the community offered her services pro bono, helping to organize the evidence into a formal complaint. "This isn't just about a lemonade stand anymore," she explained to the family. "This is about systematic abuse of power and racial profiling. We have enough here to demand real change." As the sun set on another long day of investigation, the brother looked at his sister with pride. She had transformed from a victim into a young activist, helping other kids understand their rights and document any interactions with law enforcement. The lemonade stand incident had awakened something in her, a determination to fight injustice wherever she found it. "Ready for tomorrow?" he asked her, knowing that their meeting with Internal Affairs would be challenging but crucial. She nodded, her eyes showing the same steely resolve he felt. What had started as a simple summer business had become a movement for change, and neither of them would rest until justice was served. The brother stared at his computer screen, his coffee long forgotten and cold. What had started as an investigation into one officer's misconduct had led him down a rabbit hole of corruption that made his blood run cold. The documents spread across his desk told a story far darker than anyone had imagined. "You need to see this," he called to his sister, who had become his trusted partner in the investigation. She leaned over his shoulder, her eyes widening as she read the emails he'd uncovered. Officer Miller wasn't just a lone bad cop. He was part of an organized network targeting small businesses across 3 different districts. Their living room wall had become a complex web of photos, documents, and connecting strings, looking like something from a crime thriller. But this wasn't fiction. Each piece of paper represented a real person, a real family, a real business that had been harassed or shut down. "Look at these dates," the young lawyer pointed out, her finger tracing a pattern. Every time a new business opened in these neighborhoods, they'd get visited within the first month. Those who paid the safety fees stayed open. Those who didn't. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The pattern was clear. The evidence showed a disturbing system. Officer Miller and his colleagues would target vulnerable business owners, especially young people and minorities. They'd find minor violations or create problems where none existed. Then another officer would show up, offering to help smooth things over for a price. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A rookie cop, troubled by what he'd witnessed, had been secretly documenting everything. He reached out through one of the brothers' military contacts, providing a flash drive filled with body cam footage that was supposed to have been deleted. "They made me turn off my camera during certain patrols," the rookie explained over a secure video call, his face hidden in shadow. "But I kept a backup running. I knew what they were doing wasn't right, but I didn't know who to trust." The footage showed late-night meetings behind closed businesses, envelope exchanges in patrol car windows, and countless instances of harassment disguised as routine inspections. The sister watched some of the videos with tears in her eyes, realizing her lemonade stand incident was just one small piece of a much larger puzzle. Mrs. Chen organized a secret meeting in her basement, where more business owners came forward. An elderly man who ran a small grocery store showed them years of receipts for special permits that were never officially recorded. A young woman shared security footage of officers threatening to shut down her food truck unless she paid for additional health inspections. The brother worked through the night, connecting bank records to patrol schedules. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars collected over years, all filtered through a maze of fake businesses and offshore accounts. His military training in following money trails was proving invaluable. They thought nobody would notice, his sister said quietly, helping him organize the evidence. They thought nobody would care enough to look into it. The determination in her voice made him proud. She'd grown so much stronger through this ordeal. The local news station, tipped off by Mr. Peterson's grandson, began doing their own investigation. Soon, other journalists started calling. The story was growing beyond their quiet neighborhood, threatening to expose years of systematic corruption in the police department. As they prepared their presentation for Internal Affairs, the brother received one final piece of evidence. Photographs showing Officer Miller meeting with high-ranking department officials in an abandoned parking garage. The images confirmed what they'd suspected. The corruption went all the way to the top. The brother looked at his sister, who had fallen asleep on the couch surrounded by documents. Her lemonade stand disaster had unexpectedly pulled back the curtain on a web of corruption that had been growing unchecked for years. Tomorrow, they would begin the process of exposing everything. The truth, like sunshine, would disinfect even the darkest corners of the department. The Internal Affairs office felt colder than usual that morning. The brother adjusted his tie as he waited in the conference room, 3 thick binders of evidence laid out neatly on the table before him. His sister sat beside him, looking small but determined in her pressed blouse and skirt. They'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. "Remember," he whispered to her, "let the evidence speak for itself." She nodded, clutching a USB drive containing all their digital proof. The young lawyer sat on their other side, reviewing her notes one last time. The room slowly filled with serious-faced officials, some looking curious, others clearly uncomfortable. The Chief of Internal Affairs entered last, his expression unreadable. "You have 1 hour," he stated flatly, taking his seat at the head of the table. The brother stood, his military bearing evident as he began their presentation. "2 weeks ago, my sister was arrested for running a lemonade stand." He started, his voice steady. "What we uncovered while investigating that incident will change this department forever." He clicked to the first slide, showing a timeline of Officer Miller's suspicious activities. The evidence unfolded like chapters in a book. Bank records appeared on the screen, showing mysterious deposits matching dates of business inspections. Body camera footage played, revealing threatening conversations with small business owners. Photos displayed late-night meetings between officers and local officials. "This isn't about one officer," the sister spoke up, her voice stronger than she felt. "This is about a system that preys on people who can't fight back." She shared her own story, then played recordings from other victims: the Vietnamese restaurant owner, the food truck vendor, the elderly grocery store owner. The room grew tenser with each revelation. Some officials took furious notes, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The chief's face darkened as the evidence mounted, especially when they revealed connections to his own department. "This is the surveillance footage from behind City Hall," the brother continued, playing a video showing Officer Miller meeting with high-ranking officials. "Notice the envelopes changing hands. We've matched the dates with suspicious deposits in these offshore accounts." The young lawyer stepped forward, distributing detailed reports of every violation, complete with witness statements and photographic evidence. "We're not just filing a complaint," she announced. "We're demanding a full federal investigation." The sister opened her laptop, showing the social media response to her incident. "The whole country is watching now," she explained. "Thousands of people have shared similar stories from their own communities. This isn't going away." Just then, phones around the room started buzzing. The brother smiled slightly, right on schedule. The local news station had just broken the story, complete with evidence they'd provided. There would be no quietly burying this investigation. The chief tried to maintain control. "These are serious allegations that require," he began, but the brother cut him off by playing an audio recording of the chief himself discussing contribution quotas with his officers. The room fell silent. "We've already sent copies of everything to the FBI, the Department of Justice, and every major news outlet," the brother stated calmly. "You can work with us to clean up this department, or you can try to fight it. But this ends today." The sister stood beside her brother, no longer afraid. The transformation from victim to advocate was complete. "All I wanted was to sell lemonade and save for a laptop," she said softly. "Instead, I learned how to fight for justice." The officials huddled together, whispering urgently. The evidence was irrefutable, the publicity unavoidable. Through careful investigation and legal channels, they'd managed what violence never could: real, systematic change. As they left the building an hour later, reporters were already gathering outside. The brother put a protective arm around his sister. They'd done it the right way. No violence, no revenge, just truth and determination. The time for secrets and corruption was over. The time for justice had finally come. The days following their internal affairs presentation moved at lightning speed. The brother sat on the family couch, watching news coverage of Officer Miller being led out of the police station, his head bowed. It wasn't just Miller. 6 other officers had been suspended, and 3 high-ranking officials had resigned. "Your daughter's lemonade stand exposed one of the biggest police corruption scandals in our city's history," a reporter announced on TV. The camera panned to show protesters outside the police department, many holding signs with lemonade stands drawn on them. Some even had actual lemonade stands set up, turning them into symbols of resistance against abuse of power. The sister walked in, carrying a stack of letters. "More people wanting to share their stories," she explained, setting them down. Ever since the news broke, they'd been flooded with messages from across the country. Each envelope contained similar tales of harassment, but now these voices were finally being heard. The young lawyer rushed in with exciting news. "The department agreed to all our demands," she announced breathlessly. "Mandatory retraining for every officer, body cameras that can't be turned off, and a civilian oversight committee." She spread the documents on the coffee table, pointing out key changes in policy. Mrs. Chen organized a community meeting at the local library to explain the new reforms. The room was packed. Business owners, parents, students, and even some honest police officers who'd been afraid to speak up before. The brother watched proudly as his sister took the podium, explaining how citizens could report misconduct without fear of retaliation. "Change starts with us," she told the crowd, her voice firm and clear. "We have to be brave enough to stand up, smart enough to document everything, and strong enough to keep fighting until things are right." The applause that followed wasn't just for her. It was for every person who'd ever felt powerless against injustice. The police department underwent a massive transformation. New leadership was appointed, including the rookie officer who'd helped expose the corruption. He was now heading a new internal accountability division. Training programs were completely revamped, with a focus on community relations and de-escalation techniques. One afternoon, the brother found his sister at the spot where her lemonade stand had been destroyed. But instead of debris, there was now a small memorial plaque. On this spot, a young girl's courage sparked a movement for change. Surrounding the plaque were fresh flowers, maintained by neighbors who understood its significance. The federal investigation expanded to other districts, uncovering similar patterns of corruption. The brother's careful documentation became a template for other communities fighting the same battles. His military experience had taught him about fighting enemies. But this victory, one with evidence and determination rather than violence, felt more meaningful. Local businesses began to thrive again, free from harassment and illegal fees. The Vietnamese restaurant hosted a celebration dinner, their tables overflowing with food and gratitude. The food truck vendor could park without fear, and the elderly grocery store owner no longer had to pay for protection. "You know what's funny?" the sister said one evening as they watched the sunset from their porch. "I never did get that laptop I was saving for." Her brother laughed. She'd received something far more valuable instead. She'd learned how to fight injustice, how to give voice to the voiceless, and how to create real change. The media attention eventually died down, but the impact remained. Other cities began adopting their reform model. Police departments across the country started reviewing their oversight procedures. What had started with a simple lemonade stand had grown into a nationwide conversation about power, justice, and community. As summer drew to a close, the neighborhood felt different, stronger, more united. People looked out for each other more, spoke up more readily against unfairness. The brother watched his sister organizing a youth advocacy group, teaching other kids about their rights and responsibilities. She'd found her calling, turning a moment of injustice into a lifetime of purpose. 1 year later, the corner where the lemonade stand once stood had transformed into something remarkable. Instead of a single wooden stand, there was now a weekly youth business fair, with dozens of young entrepreneurs selling everything from homemade crafts to baked goods. The sister stood in the middle of it all, helping a nervous young boy set up his first stand. "Remember," she told him gently, "you have every right to be here." And look, she pointed to the community liaison officer who was walking around with a smile, buying cookies and lemonade from each stand. Things are different now. Better. The brother watched from a distance, sipping lemonade made from their grandmother's recipe. He transitioned from his military career into running a security consulting firm, specializing in training law enforcement in community engagement and de-escalation techniques. His sister's experience had shown him a different way to serve. "Your sister's quite something," said Mr. Peterson, now a regular fixture at community events despite his cane. "Who would have thought that one terrible day would lead to all this?" He gestured at the bustling street fair, where people of all backgrounds mingled freely, without fear. The youth advocacy group that the sister had started now had chapters in 3 neighboring cities. They called themselves the Lemonade League, turning the symbol of her ordeal into a badge of hope. They taught kids about their rights, helped small businesses navigate regulations, and worked closely with the reformed police department on community initiatives. Mrs. Chen had turned her front yard into a community garden, where she taught local kids about growing vegetables and running their own produce stands. The Vietnamese restaurant owner now offered free business classes in their back room every Sunday. The food truck vendor had expanded to a fleet of 3 trucks, employing local youth. The changes went beyond their neighborhood. The police department had become a national model for reform, with officers from other cities coming to learn their new methods. The rookie who'd helped expose the corruption was now leading training sessions, teaching new officers about integrity and community trust. Sometimes, the sister explained to a documentary crew filming the street fair, "Bad things happen to show us what needs to be fixed. But it's what you do afterward that matters." She'd grown into a powerful speaker, frequently invited to share her story at schools and community organizations. The brother had worried that the experience might have left his sister bitter or afraid. Instead, it had given her purpose. She'd turned her college applications into essays about community activism and social change, earning scholarships and admiration from schools across the country. Even Officer Miller's story had an unexpected ending. After serving his sentence, he'd reached out to apologize and now spoke to police cadets about the importance of integrity and the consequences of abuse of power. His testimony had helped reform departments in other cities. The young lawyer who'd helped them had started a nonprofit legal clinic, offering free services to small business owners and young entrepreneurs. "It all started with your lemonade stand," she told the sister during one of their regular community meetings. "You showed us that one person really can make a difference." As the sun set on another successful street fair, the sister gathered everyone for a group photo. The community had made it a tradition to recreate this picture every year, watching as their movement grew. Where there had once been fear and division, there was now unity and strength. The brother put his arm around his sister as they walked home, passing the memorial plaque that still marked where her stand had fallen. "You know," he said, "most people would have just given up after what happened. But you turned it into something amazing." She smiled, watching the last vendors pack up their stands. "Life gave us lemons," she said with a laugh, "so we made something better than lemonade. We made change." And in that moment, looking at all they'd accomplished, both siblings knew that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting back, but from building something new and better from the pieces of what was broken.